left large populations of Black and Latino people inside the Bronx, reserve labor. When you look at the environmental issues, it's about understanding the Bronx as a thoroughway, right? The Bronx contains four major interstate highways that were built between 1950s and 60s, right? And this is directly linked to the asthma. The Bronx also has the highest asthma rates in the city. NYU study found that students exposed to air pollutants in neighborhoods and the children in South Bronx, they're twice as likely to attend a school near highways as the children in other parts of the city. About a fifth of all students from pre-kindergarten to 8th grade in the area have gone to schools within 2 blocks of highways. Right? There are 4 major interstate highways, and asthma death rates are double that of New York City. So, asthma rate, so we see asthma rates being high because of the highways and interstate commerce that happens throughout the Bronx. We see in the map here, for the major interstate highways up in the Bronx. We see highways within Brooklyn and Queens, but this is very different because Brooklyn and Queens connect to Long Island, whereas the Bronx connects to the U.S. mainland, which means upstate New Jersey. This is where we have major trucks and commerce moving in throughout, and also having populations of people moving from upstate New York into the city or into Long Island. And many of this restructuring happened under Robert Moses, infamous name in the Bronx. He did a lot of restructuring of New York City at the expense of most working people from the 1950s to the 70s. And famous quote says, "He I raise my stein to the builder who can remove ghettos without removing people, as I hail the chef who can make omelets without breaking eggs." Right? So it shows what are the interests. These highways serve a purpose that is not for the people, right? Is directly expressed as such. Poverty in the Bronx is graded throughout the United States. Poverty. The Bronx is the poorest congressional district in the whole United States. This is worse, of course, for children, which half of them living in poverty. Interestingly enough, right, Puerto Ricans being the largest ethnic group in the Bronx, the most comparable on the site under U.S. jurisdiction is Puerto Rico, where 45% of adults and 56% of children are impoverished. Right. We can give comparison here. Now we look at percent of the population by the census, and we see the concentrations. And we can remember what the map was before, the concentrations of poor people, 40 to 100% people under the poverty line being in the brown sectors, and then 30 to 39% being in the dark green sections. And we can compare this. And we look at the major manufacturing zones, and the triangles being toxic releases per year, and air pollution in the circles mostly throughout the same areas. And we can compare and contrast across the 2 maps. Now, what is the environmental struggles? How does the environmental struggle relate to the Bronx? Well, it's very different, right? The Bronx. When Hurricane Sandy hit New York City, the Bronx wasn't notably affected in the same way. The East Bronx is close to the water, but the Bronx is also in the back of New York City. North is the most northern. So the storm hit all the other boroughs, right? Queens and Brooklyn first, and Lower Manhattan were affected a lot more, right? The Bronx is also hilly, so it's very hilly. So it's also not close. It's not very close to the water. There wasn't incredible flooding at the same scale. It wasn't at the same scale we saw in Lower Manhattan or on the Rockaway, right? This environmental struggle in the Bronx has a lot to do with pollution. But when we talk about like the differences, right, in green energy or green jobs. What does this really mean? Right, it's about I think understanding that many people have tried like different reform programs, notably like Sustainable South Bronx, looking at like how to create sustainable jobs or green energy inside the Bronx. Um, well, I mean, this is more like putting a band-aid on a large wound. It doesn't really necessarily create large-scale effects. Sustainable South Bronx had like devised a plan. It worked out fairly well. In the summertime, you paint the roofs white instead of black because they reflect light, less heating. You save energy that way. Well, that's impressive, but people are still poor. People still have struggles with their landlords, etc. A lot of the people don't own where they live at. So a lot of people talk about like leftists in the first world tend to de-emphasize the land question. They see it as a third world problem. Now it's true that there are no peasants in the United States, but there's a large struggle in the Bronx in particular, and you can see this along like many other places, especially urban cities or like suburban places. Right, the land question is very important. I mean, the tenant struggle, the struggle for owning, where you live, is an incredible struggle in the Bronx. Right, it's like understanding that the political struggles in the Bronx. Right, I mean, the environmental struggles have a lot to do with just the political economy. It has to do a lot with the political struggles, right? Historically, right, the Young Lords Party had serve the people programs. One of them was like doing lead detection in people's apartments because the state wouldn't do so, right? It's so while people have done a lot of research, people have done like a lot of research on what could be done for in regards to the pollution or like creating a sustainable South Bronx. Well, the only sustainable South Bronx would be a socialist South Bronx. Green jobs and green